about working with an artist that doesn't have your idea about music is figuring out how to connect with that person. And I'll be honest, there's a lot of times where I'll hear somebody's music and I'm like, I can't figure this out. I don't understand this personality type. And usually the best thing I've found is just to be with that person a lot, to listen to them, to listen to their music a lot, to try and find out what their influences are. And I feel like if you really listen to people, you can connect, but it takes a little while. And there's been some where I'll be honest, I have never connected. The challenge I think for artists going forwards is going to be, how can I be remarkable? And how can I make my music connect with people in a really specific way that nobody else has done before? And I think that's the biggest challenge that we're going to face in the next few years. And it's a great challenge because we've got such creative people in the music industry, particularly in this town.
Welcome to Just Men, a life-changing program that resonates hope as well as encouragement. The program that gives you information and inspiration for the glory of God. I'm your host, Jeff Tate, and thank you for joining Just Men. On today's program, we have a very special guest. It's his first time being on Just Men. Please welcome Eric Barfield. Eric, welcome to Just Men.
So great to be here. Thank you.
Man, I tell you, we are elated that you're on our program. You add value to our program, and we're just looking forward to some of the things that you're going to dive into in the music world, man. I mean, I've always been intrigued about music, always intrigued about the thought process that goes behind music and what it really takes to be a musician, a producer, all the things that you're going to share with us today. But before we dive into the depth of your life and your story, share just a quick bio on who is Eric Barfield.
Well, Jeff, thank you so much for letting me be here today. This was going to be so much fun. I'm a producer, keyboard player, and I just moved to Nashville about 2 years ago. I've loved this town so much. It's been an incredible place to be. And I have a wife, Sarah. I have a son of 4 months old who is Jackson. He's just starting to really develop his personality and all that. And yeah, I'm just living life in the Music City.
Wow. Let's take me a little bit back. You know, I got to pull the layers on you and get to the history of the man that you are today and what really groomed you, what really shaped you into this musician, this producer, you know, this artist. You know, talk a little bit about your background and how you were introduced to music to give you inspiration.
Well, thank you. Man, it probably started with my mom and dad. My dad is a singer-songwriter, and my mom is a piano teacher slash pianist slash mom slash a whole bunch of other stuff. So they got me started on piano lessons. The rule was you can take piano lessons. You're going to have to take piano lessons until you're actually good at piano. At first, I hated piano. I'm like, Mom, let me quit. Let me quit. I don't want to do this. And eventually, I got to the point where I could quit. And I'm like, God, well, I made it this far, I might as well keep going. And then I really started to develop this love for music. And so it was just one of those wonderful moments where I realized at about 16, this is what I want to do. So I started making some adjustments in the way that I thought about my career, started working towards some specific goals of what I wanted to be, which at the time it was like a singer-songwriter, producer, run my own rock band. And one thing led to another, and that led to Nashville.
Wow. You know, it's amazing when people tap into their purpose early in life, how it seems to order the steps. I know Mark Twain says there's two significant or important days in our life, the day we were born and the day we find out why. And it's just amazing when you, at 16, starting to realize that all this gift coming together from your mom and your dad, how it would culminate into the man you are today in terms of music. Talk about your style. I mean, you're talking about your mom and your dad, and they both are on both sides of the spectrum in terms of music, but obviously you found your personality in there too. So what is your style of music, and how do you relate to music?
You know, it's so funny because my dad, like I said, was a singer-songwriter. He came down in 2001 to record in Nashville, and we were driving downtown Franklin, Tennessee, and this song came on the radio, and I'm like, oh, I like that band. Who's that band? And the co-producer who was sitting there in driving the car turned around and said, "You've never heard the Beatles before? What's wrong with you?" And I was like, I'm 14 years old. I don't know anything about the Beatles. So to me, the Beatles were like that first thing that kind of caught my interest. And like most musicians, there's always that first band, I think. And so I started listening to them, quickly moved into a bunch of different pop rock groups, and then really got into electronica with my first band back in the day, in like 2008, 2009. And since then, I've kind of moved directly into kind of CCM, like contemporary Christian music, worship, along with electronic dance music, EDM style, things like that.
Wow, that's very diverse, man. How do you pull all that together to create this symphonic sound for that would represent your personality? I mean, how do you pull that together, especially with the different genres of music?
Well, Jeff, that's a really good question, because I feel like so often my job as a producer is taking my personality and putting it to the side and really hearing what that person is trying to communicate with their music, and then interpreting it through who I am as a person. And so that's been the challenge of being the producer, and it's been really fun for me here.
Where do you get your creativity from?
Another great question. I would say my biggest inspiration for creativity is listening to other artists, of course, but surprisingly through reading. I love reading. I try to read at least one book a week, and so I go through a lot of different kinds of books. I love poetry. My favorite poet of all time is Dylan Thomas. Bob Dylan named himself after.
Wow.
Yeah. And T.S. Eliot, some of those like turn of the century poets and a little bit later. So just having that as inspiration really drives me creatively.
Wow, that's beautiful. I always wonder how a musician particularly would take poetry, words, and express that through sound. How do you do that? And particularly, is there a particular, from Dylan's, one of his poems that just resonates in your heart that you could, articulate that in sound into the piano? I mean, what would that be, and how do you do that?
Boy, the trickiest thing I think about taking something like poetry and letting it inspire you is taking the imagery and trying to come up with a sonic interpretation of it. So like one of the things I love about T.S. Eliot is there's these super rich, multifaceted connections in his poetry, to the point where you have to really go deep in order to truly understand the poem. I mean, you can get it right off the bat, but then if you really want the richness, you have to go a little deeper. And I feel like that's where my style comes from. I like lots and lots of tracks. I love really rich sounds. I like combining synthetic sounds like synthesizers, EDM beats, with more traditional instruments like cello, for instance.
Wow.
And so that's kind of the what the lyrical quality and the rich textured quality of the poetry that I mentioned is what inspires me musically to create that same sort of atmosphere.
Wow, man, that is awesome. When you are collaborating with other artists, and you said you're looking for their strengths, and I also reflect your personality, when you are doing that, do you find areas that are tremendously challenging for you when you're trying to pull that all together, or is it just flow seamlessly, or do you have this special gift automatic? It doesn't matter who it is, you're able to get it to flow and produce the sound that is needed. I mean, how's the dynamics of that, and what does that say about relationships? I think that's what I want to get back to, about music and relationships.
There's a really good point. Yeah. So one of the things I think is the hardest thing about working with an artist that doesn't have your idea about music is figuring out how to connect with that person. And I'll be honest, there's a lot of times where I'll hear somebody's music and I'm like, I can't figure this out. I don't understand this personality type. And usually the best thing I've found is just to be with that person a lot, to listen to them, to listen to their music a lot, to try and find out what their influences are. And I feel like if you really listen to people, you can connect, but
Wow.
it takes a little while. And there's been some where I'll be honest, I have never connected with them. Like I tried, and I just couldn't get inside their head. So
Wow, man, that's amazing. Because when I hear you and I talk about when we're talking about music, I'm thinking about relationships. I'm really thinking about relationships. I mean, even to the simplicity of reading a poem and how it's expressed through a relationship and how we would commune with that book or commune with that person or spend time with them. And then what happens is that we create a sound, we create music, we create relationships, we create a son. We create these type of things out of the relationship. So it's just amazing how your approach to union and communion to create a sound that is representative of both you and the artist. Talk a little bit about your music in the standpoint of where you see it moving to and where do you see it going in terms of pulling it all together and how you're providing your services as well. Talk a little bit about those parts.
Sure. So I guess the biggest thing that's happened in the last few years is just the rise of the producer as a creator in and of itself. Like for instance, Zed, the Chainsmokers, DJ Snake. There's a bunch of these new artists who will go out and reach out to individual singers or instrumentalists, and then will take what they have and sort of mod it, like sort of this, create their own sound from it. And that's the thing that excites me the most creatively right now. It's going out to Nashville, where you can't walk in this town without running into somebody who can blow your mind because they're so amazing. And finding those people, talking to them, being in a relationship with them. In fact, this last month, I collaborated with a guy named Vian Isaac, and it's Izak. He is from South Africa, and he went back to South Africa, made an amazing album with all of these great singers on it, and I heard his stuff, and we're friends, and I'm like, we should collab on this. So he sent me the tracks. I chopped it all up and turned it into like an EDM dance song, and I'll make sure to give you a link so you can. But it was so much fun, and it's just amazing to be around people who are that talented.
Yeah. So when you are, if someone was interested in collaborating with you, what should they look for and what should they expect out of that collaboration with you and your services that you're going to provide to take them maybe to another level or expound upon what they've already created, but really give them a sound that is reflective more of their personality and where you're taking this industry to, the music industry. Share a little bit about that.
Well, man, I think anytime that you're looking for a collaborator is you're trying to find somebody who can understand not necessarily the style of what you're creating, because, well, naturally you'll want to do that as well, but not just the style, but the heart of your music. Because if you can figure out what the most important thing in a particular song or a particular artist is, and then you have a talented producer who can take that and just push it, even in directions you might have not have thought of, that's when you really come up with amazing results, I think.
Wow, that's beautiful. You know, I as you were speaking, I thought about the songs or the music you produce reflecting other artists, but what songs is going to reflect your son, and what songs are going to reflect your wife? I mean, do you have any that you've already written, or some that you think that is going to really bring the heart, the fullness of your music?
Jackson and Sarah are the two most important people in my life, bar none. And I feel like I don't have specific songs written for them. I wrote one song for my wife when we were first dating, and I'll be honest, it was a little sappy, probably because I was head over heels in love. But I feel like they have such a powerful impact on my life in general that they're, who they are as people just permeates everything that I do. So I don't write songs specifically for them, but they have such a tremendous impact on my personality and the way I think about things, the way I feel about things, that everything that I do has some little piece of them in it.
Wow, that's beautiful. You know, there's a reason why I bring that out and have you to reflect on your family, because so many times, particularly men, are not looked at from a positive standpoint of being an adequate father or adequate husband, and their work seems to be separate from their family.
Mm.
And here you're expressing that your work is all part of your family and everyone is working together. Even though they may not be writing the notes, they may not be hitting the keyboards, but they're doing it through you vicariously because of your relationship with them. And that's music that I think that holds its longevity and become timeless from that standpoint, because it breathes, as you talk about, the heart, the life into it. And so that's beautiful, man. And I'm glad you said that, to give a reflection, because many times men are not looked at, particularly when it comes to your field. Talk a little bit in some of the things about your field in music that really inspires you at the next level to say what your expectations are and where do you see music going, that you feel you're going to be able to fit in and be on the cutting edge of that. I mean, is there any areas that you see that where you see there's really needs to be a breakthrough and you're on the cutting edge of that breakthrough?
Oh man, well, it's an exciting time to be a musician, I think, for a lot of reasons. One, with the advent of like Spotify and streaming services in general, it's just blown up the industry, because we went from a model where everybody's buying an album or iTunes or something like that,
Right.
to people are paying every month, like $10 a month or whatever, to get all the music in the world. So it's just amazing how that has changed the dynamic of the way people think about art, the way that people create music even. It makes you think a lot more about how can I create something that is so remarkable that people are willing to listen to it, because they can listen to anything. You're competing with Michael Jackson and the Beatles and everybody who's on Spotify. So the challenge, I think, for artists going forwards is going to be, how can I be remarkable, and how can I make my music connect with people in a really specific way that nobody else has done before. And I think that's the biggest challenge that we're going to face in the next few years. And it's a great challenge because we've got such creative people in the music industry, particularly in this town. And I think that answer is going to come. It's like people are taking a giant sandbox and sifting it through some sort of a strainer here, trying to figure out what's going to come through in the end.
Wow, yeah, I know Nashville is so filled with artists, and many times they're coming here to be discovered and to find an identity, and so much from that standpoint. You know, when you begin to pull all these things together in terms of your music and your career and what you want to personify in music, is there anything that, or a song that you feel that is your best song or your best work up to this point?
You know, my favorite song is the last song I did. So whatever song that I just got done with and I play it back, I'm like, oh, that was so much fun.
Wow.
And then my next favorite song is the next one that I do, and so on and so forth. I love making music, and I think that all artists tend to love what they're working on at the moment because it's the most exciting. It's the act of creation that we love the most.
Yeah. What keeps you positive? You know?
Well, I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of times where I struggle with not being positive. My wife can attest to that. I think that the thing that keeps me the most hopeful is the fact that I know that there's a God who cares specifically about me, and that ultimately I'm just his little kid. And I feel like my son has been the hammer that's driven this nail home for me, because I've seen how when he cries, he looks at me like, Dad, what are you going to do? And I pick him up. And it doesn't fix everything, but he knows I'm there. And that presence of being, knowing that God is there, he's real, he's right next to me, he's with me when I'm doing these things, is such a comforting thing, and it helps me to relax, because I tend to want to be the control freak.
Wow, this is amazing you would say that because now you know you done shift gears on me when you start talking about presence. Because I know the power of presence in my own life and how we become God's instrument of peace, God's instrument of hope, as you talked about, and even more significantly, we are God's instrument of love. And love is really the heartbeat of God. It's a sound that sometimes musicians tap into and they express it differently. But especially when it comes to the music, people attract and attach to music, and it sort of soothes a lot of the particularly anxieties and pain and anger and things of that nature they're going through. I know when King Saul, even though he had the title and he had the position, but he didn't have the presence of God because of his disobedience. So what he did was he would call David to come in and play the harp. And David would soothe that spirit because he was tormented. And a lot of times people have the titles, positions, and things, but they're tormented privately, and sometimes the music kind of soothes them and changed the atmosphere. And it did for Saul, but the thing was that he couldn't hear the music of his own heart. Someone always had to come in and play the music. Well, what happens when that person can't bring the music? Then what do? You're in despair. And so I think it's beautiful that your wife keeps pointing you in being a positive direction for you about the gift that's inside of you that never leaves you.
Yes.
Never leaves you. And that's why I said you really shifted my discussion when you start talking about music that is developed or birthed out of presence. Whatever presence that is, whether it's God's presence or you and I presence, or you and your wife presence, or you and Jackson, your son's presence, what is birthed out of that relationship creates music that really touches the heart, that changes people. And that's something, man, that's so powerful. And I'm glad you brought that about in terms of just how God is a part of your equation when it comes to representing music. Many times that's not. And some people think that they can't have that as a part of their genre or part of their disposition, I guess. So it's just amazing you would say that. What else is on your heart in terms of music, man? I've got this opportunity, and I really want to take advantage of it because I've always loved music. And sometimes, and I listen to all type of music, but my wife said I need to be a little more diversified.
She's like, go out there, just pick something off the
Yeah,
shelf,
get
right?
something, because I'm a jazz person, man.
Oh,
I
jazz.
love jazz. So talk a little bit about jazz. I'm gonna pick mine. I'm gonna be a little selfish, because as a pianist, man. I mean, what is jazz, and what is music in your music as it relates to jazz, or can you equate your music to jazz to some degree?
Oh, I love jazz. I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri,
Wow. Yeah.
and big jazz town. Cut my teeth when I was 17 years old. I remember I was playing in a coffee shop, and this guy comes in and goes, "Hey, how would you like to play every night at my my piano bar?" I'm like, "Okay." He's like, "It's 3-4 hours a night. You're gonna play like 4 to 5 nights a week, maybe more, maybe less. And can you do it?" I'm like, "Sure, absolutely." And I got done and realized, you know what? I've got like 6 songs that I know. I'm like, well, it's a start, So I got out a fake book, which for the non-musical, it's just the melody line and some chords, and I ended up just playing through jazz stuff all the time, and I really sucked at first. I was terrible. And then I heard Miles Davis's Kind of Blue and started studying jazz in depth and just fell in love. So I guess just roundabout to your question, I feel like jazz is something that just has such depth for musicians and just breathes a certain kind of improvisational skill into your playing if you can master it. And I don't claim to have mastered it, but it's just such, it's like the modern classical. It's just such a deep subject to work with, and I love playing it whenever I get the chance.
Wow, that's beautiful. The word keeps coming back to me over and over and over, and I got to ask you, and I want to get your perspective on this one word that seems to resonate in my spirit, and it is the word resilience. What does it mean to you, resilience?
Man, to me, it seems like the ability to endure suffering in a positive way. I feel like my wife, in a lot of ways, personifies that right now. She, the other day, we realized she'd been up 24 hours without any sleep at all with my son, and I'm coming and it's like 6 a.m. in the morning. I'm like, honey, are you okay? And she's like, yeah. And she picks him up and goes, isn't Jackson beautiful?
Mm.
And I'm like, that's resiliency, and that's the resiliency married with love. The fact that you don't hate this little creature who's kept you up for 24 hours. It's just amazing to me to see that kind of thing. And I feel like as musicians, our job is to be resilient in a very stubborn, tenacious way. We need to never ever compromise the artistic integrity of what we're doing. That's where we need to be really stubborn. We need to constantly get up and do great art every single day. And that to me is the definition of what resiliency is for a musician.
Wow, man, that is beautiful, man. I like that. That's that's I mean, and then it's motivated out of love. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I think love brings its own integrity, and it sustains you. I mean, it's amazing what we will tolerate when it's predicated on love.
Yes.
I mean, staying up 24 hours, but love. I mean, obviously we know the greatest love of all in terms of just our relationship with God, but still, it shows how he's long suffering and how his mercy and his grace is always extended in spite of us because he sees love.
Yeah.
He don't see us whining all the time, right?
Which I do a lot of. Yeah. I'm like,
But he
God,
still
why?
prevails that gift. He said, oh, just fall back in love with me and you'll be able to persevere. And I just like the way you describe that whole process of what it means to be resilient as artists. And one word you used was the word integrity. Don't compromise. You know, hold fast to that, man, because that is the gift that God has given you. And when you begin to start changing that, God doesn't recognize the very gift that he gave you because he expecting that gift to represent him in every facet of life. And so there's so many people that are tapped into your music and your way of living and your way of connecting, that they need it to be unique coming from you and not compromised because they're waiting for that. They're waiting, man, for that emergence, man, that emergence that comes from you out of being birthed, out of your time with your family, your time with God, and your time with the poetry and all those things that you pour in order to produce and to perfect God's gift inside of you. Last word of encouragement. What word would you say to the musicians and the world out there in music?
I'd say keep doing great art. And that doesn't mean you have to be doing music necessarily.
Wow.
It just means make your life great and make it beautiful.
Wow, that is awesome. Stay focused.